Good morning, and thank you for joining us. We'll begin our session in just a few seconds after everyone has joined the room. So please pardon the awkward silence for just a few seconds while everyone joins us. Okay, it looks like our numbers have slowed down there. So let's begin. So thank you for joining us. Hello again. My name is Phil Russo. I am the Executive Director of NAVTA, and I am pleased to welcome all of you to the kickoff session to NAVTA's 2022 Leadership Summit. This summit has been created solely to provide help, information, guidance, and tools to veterinary technicians who are volunteer leaders of vet tech associations and academies. As such, today we won't be talking about anything clinical. Instead, we'll be focusing on 4 critical areas of association management: government relations, governance, member engagement, and generating non-dues revenue. Before I get started, though, I have just a few housekeeping items to go over. First, please know that this session is scheduled for 1 hour and is being recorded for later access on NAVTA's YouTube channel. The full summit program, all 4 webinars happening today, have been RACE approved for 4 CE credits. Those who attend all 4 live sessions will be eligible to receive a certificate of completion, and NAVTA will send those out by the end of next week. If at any point during the session you need technical assistance, please send me a private message through the chat box. Just click on chat and find my name, Phil Russo, and send me a private message and I'll help you out. Also, please feel free to use the chat box to add any comments, to talk to each other, or to send the speaker some virtual applause. Please don't use the chat box for questions because they'll get lost in the long string of conversation. For questions, please use the Q&A option on your screen. Just click the Q&A icon and type your question. We'll stop occasionally during the session to answer those questions. I think there'll also be some time at the end to do some Q&A as well. And now on to the session. Our first webinar in the 2022 Leadership Summit is titled How to Work with Veterinary Boards and Legislators. I would like to thank Merck for sponsoring this session and contributing to NAVTA's success. Our expert and most excellent speaker for this session is Dr. Ashley Morgan. Dr. Morgan is the director of AVMA's Division of State Advocacy, where she leads AVMA's advocacy efforts and engagement with state and allied veterinary medical associations in legislative and regulatory activities. Dr. Morgan is a graduate of Cornell University's College of Veterinary Medicine, and she's also a certified association executive, so she clearly knows what she's talking about. Although some people say CAE stands for Certified Animal Expert. She's that as well. Dr. Morgan has been a tremendous asset to me in my dual roles as executive director of both NAVTA and NJVMA, and I know you'll learn a lot from her. So without further delay, here is Dr. Ashley Morgan.
Thank you, Phil. I appreciate that very kind introduction and the opportunity to be here. Good morning to all of our participants. As Phil said, I'm Ashley Morgan and director of the AVMA's Division of State Advocacy. Prior to joining my work at the AVMA, I was an equine practitioner in Southern Virginia and North Carolina and completed a year-long fellowship working in a U.S. Senator's office. For those who are not aware, the AVMA does have a government relations division, which lobbies or advocates to members of Congress and federal agencies, such as the Food and Drug Administration, the U.S. Department of Agriculture, and the Drug Enforcement Administration, or DEA. The Division of State Advocacy, as Phil said, serves as a resource for state and allied veterinary medical associations, providing support for their advocacy efforts at the state level. Today, I'm going to share ways you can make a positive difference in policy making. And as Phil said, please feel free to ask questions as we go, and he will keep an eye on those and share them with me, and hopefully we'll also have some time at the end. Since it might have been a while since anyone was in a Government 101 course, we'll go over some of the basics. Just as a reminder, a refresher, there are 3 branches of the federal government: the legislative branch, which is made up of the House of Representatives and the Senate, and these are the folks who make the laws. We have the executive branch, which is the president and the federal agencies who enforce the laws and write the regulations that implement the laws. And of course, the judicial branch, which is the Supreme Court, who reviews the laws. Typically, states are going to function with a very similar governmental structure. They'll have two bodies of their legislature, a House and a Senate, or as sometimes called an assembly. They have the state government agencies which regulate, and these are, we think of often, the boards of veterinary medicine, and then of course the governor in each of the states. In the US Congress, there are 100 senators, 2 from each state. Each of these members serves a 6-year term with elections happening every 2 years. And these are staggered so that you only have 1/3 of the senators turning over at a time. US territories, there are 5 of those: American Samoa, Guam, the Northern Mariana Islands, Puerto Rico, and the US Virgin Islands, and the District of Columbia do not have representation in the Senate. In the House of Representatives, there are 435 voting representatives. Some of our less populated states like Alaska, Delaware, and North Dakota only have 1 representative, so it's not based on the geographical size of the state, but of the number of constituents in the state. So larger states like California, or states I should say with more constituents like California, have 53 representatives. While the 5 territories that I mentioned in the District of Columbia do have representatives in the House of Representatives, they are actually unable to vote on legislation. Representatives face election or re-election every 2 years. And this is something particular to keep in mind as we go through the discussion and ways to engage in advocacy, because these members are constantly campaigning for re-election if they are planning to run again. And so they are regularly out listening to constituents and wanting to make friends with constituents so they can get re-elected. For many members of Congress, being a legislator is their only job at the federal level. Congress is in session year-round, and so this is their only job. However, some of them do continue their pre-political careers and then return to those careers when they leave the Congress. Currently, there is 1 veterinarian in the US Congress, Representative Kurt Schrader. He is a veterinarian from Oregon's 5th District, a Democrat, and he leads the Veterinary Medicine Caucus. At our most recent peak, we had 3 representatives who were veterinarians, but 2 of those chose not to run for re-election last Congress. We have also had some veterinarians in the Senate in the past, but it has unfortunately been some time since we've had veterinarians serving in the US Senate. The legislative process involves many steps, but bills will typically follow the same path. I'll speak about it from the federal perspective. The state is fairly similar, but an idea is presented to a legislator by constituents. These can be individuals, or an association brings an idea to a legislator, or it's something that the legislator is personally passionate about. So, for example, a legislator had learned about a neighbor's dog that had died by xylitol poisoning, had gotten into some food with xylitol, and the dog did end up passing away. So now the legislator is actually championing a piece of legislation in the US Congress that would require all products containing xylitol to have a label on them. Another example, the AVMA, we wanted to pursue changes to allow veterinarians to transport controlled substances away from the clinics. You think about veterinarians needing to take medications to farms or out to people's homes if you're going to do a home visit, a home euthanasia. And the DEA had said that this was not allowed by existing law. This was early in 2012. And so the AVMA took this idea to Representative Schrader's office, who he was an equine practitioner prior to joining Congress. And we took this idea to him, and he helped shepherd that through the Congress. And that law was actually enacted in 2013. So a bill is introduced in one chamber, such as the House, where it is then referred to a committee. You have your hearings, amendments are made, and eventually, hopefully, it gets passed out of that committee and goes to the floor for a vote. And then once it passes that chamber, it goes over to the other chamber and has to go through that process again. Sometimes it requires a simple majority, so just 51% of the vote. Other times it requires 2/3 majority. You know, there are a variety of different ways that it goes about it. But when the bill passes, it then goes to the other chamber and is hopefully voted on there, and then ultimately makes its way to the president, or at the state level, the governor for signing or for veto. And then you have to go back through another process. This slide is not necessarily for you to learn all the numbers and that sort of thing, but this is just to reflect that it is not uncommon for a bill to take several years to successfully go through the legislative process. And it's not uncommon for the same bill to get introduced year after year if it does not make it across the finish line. These numbers here, you'll see the 116th Congress, which ended in 2019, so the last full session that we have numbers for yet. There were only 2% of the bills that were actually signed into law of all of those that were introduced. So again, there's sometimes not a lot of movement on bills, and you have to try again. This means we have to take a concerted and consistent effort for a message to make its way through the halls of Congress, and we really have to remain persistent if it's something that we're championing. This is also true for bills, I would say, that we don't want to see enacted. If there's something that we don't like and we don't want to see cross the finish line, we have to be vigilant. There is, though, a little bit of a silver lining with the slow process for these things that we don't like. It often takes them a long time to make it across the finish line or to ever cross and get enacted. So I'll just shift gears a little bit to the state legislatures as well. Again, this slide has a lot of information on it, but just to sort of capture a few different points. On average, there are more than 109,000 bills introduced in state legislatures each year. And all of these, of course, dealing with a range of issues. And while more than quadruple the number of bills are introduced in the states than at the federal level, states often have a much shorter time frame for which they can introduce legislation, hold hearings, and pass that legislation. A few states' legislative sessions are year-round, like Congress, but some states can be just 1 month or a few months long. This frequently shortened schedule means that constituents and groups need to move very quickly in order to have their voice heard. If you want a piece of legislation drafted, introduced, moved through committees, and voted on, you have a very short time frame in which to get that done. And at the same time, with the longer sessions, it can be sometimes it can be easy to lose focus, and you miss that something was introduced or moving. You think that it's quiet and nothing's going to happen, and then all of a sudden something is moving. Compared to the 535 members of the U.S. Congress, there are over 7,000 state legislators in the United States. There are some state legislators who only work to represent their districts. That's their job. However, an overwhelming majority have another job. Again, if you're in a state where the legislature meets for 1 month or 3 months, and a lot of times the financial stipends are not that large, you often need or maintain another job so that you have other income. Attorney and business owner are some of the most common professions of state legislators. And out of the 7,383 state legislators, only 12 count themselves as veterinarians. And 3 of those 12 are legislators in Texas alone. The relatively low number of legislators with professional knowledge of veterinary medicine is really important to keep in mind as we talk to the legislators and their staff, because the legislators, of course, often fall back on their own professional knowledge when they are considering legislation and making a decision and voting. With so few representatives in the field of veterinary medicine or even agriculture as legislators, they really need our help in understanding the needs of our field. For additional context, here on the screen, you'll see some demographic data that shows the average age of the legislator is 56, compared with 47 years old for the US adult population. 40% of state legislators have a graduate or professional degree, whereas only 11% of the general public does. Most legislators are white and male, while only about close to 29%, are women. 8.8% are Black, 6.2% are Hispanic, and 1.7% are Asian. And even fewer consider themselves Native American or multiracial. And again, it's just important to keep in mind as we consider the perspectives of the legislators and as we're crafting our talking points and how we want to message and interact with them. But it isn't just the legislators that, of course, need to hear from their constituents. The federal agencies and state regulatory boards are, of course, a critical part of the process. These are the folks that have to take the laws and write the regulations and implement those laws. Each state has a veterinary state board, which regulates the practice of veterinary medicine and licensure of veterinarians. And while a majority of states have licensing requirements for veterinary technicians, there are about 10 states which don't have a state-regulated licensure process for technicians. Some states have a designated member, though, position on the state board for veterinary technicians, so there is a voice of the technicians on that licensing board. From the last survey that we have seen from the American Association of Veterinary State Boards, just over half of these state boards are grouped together with one or more agencies, and they report to a higher agency within the group. So they do not report directly to the governor. These agencies are groups like, that we might think of: the Department of Health, the Department of Agriculture, Department of Professional Affairs. Some then are also grouped with the Division of Consumer Affairs, or the Education Department, or even the Department of Commerce. And so understanding how the board functions is important when interacting with them, because this influences, of course, their perspective and process, which in turn impacts how we might approach interacting with them. The graphic here shows how, I would say, it shows sort of the process for regulations and where you can engage. It's fairly representative, particularly at the federal level. Oftentimes legislators will enact bills that call on action by a specific board, and sometimes it really gives the board a fair amount of leeway in what they are going to write in the regulations. One example I'll give is that we saw the Montana legislature enact last year a law that establishes licensing and qualifications for veterinary technicians, and it also adds a member, a veterinary technician member, to the Board of Veterinary Medicine. And this law, which was supported by the Montana Veterinary Medical Association, the Big Sky Veterinary Technician Association, NAVTA, and the AVMA, took a few years and a lot of hard work by those groups to get enacted. And now the state board, of course, is going through the rulemaking process to implement the law, laying out the framework for what licensure will look like. When an agency or board chooses or is required to act, they'll release a notice of proposed rulemaking. This notice is to alert the public that they intend to act on a specific measure, and they'll publish that proposed regulation for public comment. They'll have that comment period open for a period of time. A lot of times we'll see 60 days, but it really depends on the state or agency. That window can also be extended. I will say it is not uncommon for the AVMA at least to ask for an extension in comment periods to allow for a little bit more time of review and gathering our comments together. After a comment period closes, the agency or board can alter their proposed rule and submit it for more comment, or vote to approve or disapprove the regulation, and then move that on through the process. So I'll pause here for a second and see if there are any questions.
Sure, there's 4 questions for you. The first is, can you elaborate on the Federal Veterinary Caucus? When do they convene? And it would be great to attend if virtually.
Sure. It's actually the caucuses, and I should have elaborated on that. Unfortunately, it's not the type thing that other people can attend. The caucuses are almost small little, I hesitate to use the word club, but are small clubs, if you will, of the members of Congress who have an interest in a particular topic. And so veterinary medicine is one of them. Representative Schrader and former Representative Ted Yoho from Florida had created this caucus. And it's a group that any member of the House can join. And they meet, some meet more regularly than others, and talk about veterinary medicine related things, bills that are related to the profession. The AVMA will often ask that group or use that group as a group to provide information, have say like a webinar or a discussion, and provide some information. So it's really more a group of the legislators getting together around. But like I said, some of them are topic specific about issues like veterinary medicine. Others you'll see are the biking caucus, and they talk about bicycling, and it's the members of Congress who are interested in biking, things like that. So unfortunately, it's not something that we're able to join, but groups, particularly like NAVTA, could use that as a group to get together with and to share some information and distribute information. So that's really how we use the caucuses.
Thank you. Next question, I see there are a large number of other in the Senate and some representatives. What parties do those others belong to?
Oh, those would be the independent, so not identifying as Republican or Democrat. Let me just go back really quickly and see if I guess I should have checked that. Or was it something that I said about other? Oh, when I said about the other, I'm sorry. Was that question maybe, Phil, about
the composition of the Congress? Yeah.
Okay, so you mean between the Republican, the Democrat, and the independent?
I think that's what that's referring to. Yes. Yeah.
Sure. I think I also was mentioning with some of their other jobs, like their day jobs.
Yeah, right. Right. Okay. Is it possible to receive a list of the legislators who are veterinarians or veterinary technicians?
We do have a list of that we can share over with you, Phil. We do not actually have, and we would love to have if any of the associations happen to know veterinary technicians. We don't have a system that really allows us very easily to identify legislators' other jobs. The information that we have about the percentages about attorneys or business leaders is from an outside organization that just does a broad look at, surveys different legislators, and probably wouldn't go down into that detail. But if any of the associations happen to have that information, we would love to add it to our records, and happy to share, like I said, where we have veterinarians in the state legislatures.
That'd be great. Yeah, if you can send that to me, that'd be great. Awesome. Next question is related to how many state veterinary medical boards have a technician member on the board? Any idea?
I don't have that information, but it is something that we probably have in our records. And I'm hesitant to say that a lot of the states that have licensure do have a representative. I feel like some of your folks actually, Phil, would probably know that answer better than I do, but it is something that we can look up. I will say that in a number of the bills that we've seen recently, as you know, Phil, there are a number of states that are, of those 10, that still don't have state regulated licensure of technicians, and have bills that are going through the process or trying to make their way through the process. A lot of those do include the addition of a board member or an identification for that person to possibly be a technician. Sometimes it says they may be a technician, so it's not a fully designated spot for only a technician, but one of them may be a technician. But we can look into that.
Okay, great. Final question in this portion. Also related, is it common that the state board cannot have any influence on or opinion on changes to the VPA, Veterinary Practice Act?
Is it common that they cannot have an opinion?
That's the question. Yes.
I don't know if I'd say it's common that they don't or can't have an opinion. I think one rule of thumb particularly for state legislative and regulatory processes is that there's always an exception, or that there is so much variety in the way that it's done. As you asked that question, I was just quickly thinking of the comments or this discussions we've had with a number of states recently. Colorado is going through a Sunrise Act process for veterinary technicians, trying to get credentialing for technicians there. And the board, the department there, did have wrote a report on it. And so I would say that they had a fair amount of interest in it. I guess some other boards, I would say it's more common that the boards are not able to lobby the legislature or to really share their opinion with the legislature unless they're asked for the opinion. So it's very different than the associations, where we actively go to the legislators and to the board and say, this is our opinion, please do this. I would say in a lot of states that the boards are not allowed to go and do it in that fashion, but if they are asked by the legislature, do you like this idea? Do you support this? Or what do you think? But some states, like I mentioned, Colorado, that department actually reviewed the idea and wrote an entire report on it that then, but it is the state VMA and the Veterinary Technician Association, of course, they're in Colorado, that actually have to get the legislation written and move through the legislature in Colorado. So the board, while they can have an opinion, they are fairly limited in how much they are able to actually actively advocate on it. So that helps clarify. But one reason I think to be very, very engaged there at the state level, because even for me, who's in constant contact with our state associations, it varies. The process varies so widely across the country.
Makes sense. Yeah. And then just from a technical standpoint, there's a little bit of feedback coming from, or I don't know if you have a clip-on microphone. It sounds like whenever you're making hand motions, the microphone seems to be getting jostled a little bit. So if it's not a clip-on, we won't worry about it. If it's a clip-on, maybe there's a slight adjustment.
Okay. I will see. It's not a clip-on, but I will see if I can maybe move a little less.
Okay. Thank you. That's the end of our questions.
Okay, then we'll move on to, let's see. So what exactly is advocacy? I've been using that word probably a fair amount. Advocacy, of course, just the definition from Webster's is it is the act or process of supporting a cause or proposal. So really being involved in sharing your opinion and supporting something. So we have a little video here that AVMA created this video with the help of some of our veterinary members when we asked them why they were involved in advocacy. And it's a little bit like a commercial. We use it when talking really to our veterinarians who are maybe less engaged in the process or not members and not understanding why they should be engaged. And so if you'll allow me, I'm going to try sharing that now.
The dynamics of veterinary medicine are changing rapidly and dramatically.
I believe in all that veterinary medicine can be and is.
But we have to let our voice be heard about what's best for veterinarians.
What does advocacy mean to me? It means a way of educating others on issues that are important to veterinary medicine. It also means for me to give back, pay forward, and make sure that veterinary medicine continues to thrive.
You never know when a law is going to be presented that can have critical change to our profession.
Veterinarians have a unique place and a perspective in the world. We are trained to be problem solvers, and that skill allows us to be extremely valuable in shaping policies that will impact our future.
At its core, the veterinary profession is the only one that is meant to protect animals, people, and the world we share.
Veterinarians ought to advocate for the profession's priorities, because if we don't, who will?
The world is constantly evolving, and we need to lead the innovation for our industry, institutions, policies, and laws. If we don't, we're going to allow others less qualified to dictate our future.
I think it's important for veterinarians to be the cause of the good change and not at the effect of the harmful changes to the profession. We don't need to stick our heads in the sand and wait for good things to happen. Advocacy is that force for positivity and change. We need it to protect the profession.
I know that my individual legacy is going to be insignificant, but our profession, we can do amazing things.
And that is what keeps me engaged.
So again, focused, of course, on veterinarians and trying to get our veterinary colleagues engaged. But I think the messages and really the intent behind it resonates regardless that there really is a reason for all of us to be engaged. So advocacy is, of course, a critical part of the democratic process, and there are many ways to get involved. Here you'll see in the schematic, of course, letters, emails, social media, phone calls, attending hearings and town halls, testifying and meeting with legislators or regulators. These tools all have different advantages and disadvantages that organizations and individuals can use, of course, hopefully to our advantage.
Excuse me, Ashley, your volume seems to have gone down significantly. The video volume was fine, but your volume speaking isn't high at all.
Is that adjusting it at all any better?
Still low.
Okay, let me keep trying to get this to slide up. Is that any better?
That sounds better than it was, yes.
Okay, and I will also speak up, so hopefully that will help.
That's perfect. There you go.
Let's see, let me get this to go away. Okay, thank you, Phil. So grassroots advocacy, you will hear people often use the term grassroots. Grassroots advocacy is the foundation of really any effective advocacy strategy. This is where we utilize volunteers to provide the effective lobbying. We mobilize the volunteers, our constituents, to lobby the legislatures, to talk before agencies, and really even engage with the general public, because sometimes it really requires educating the general public, who are also, at the same time as we are talking to our legislators, they are talking to the same legislators. And so we want them to understand why we are asking for something to be supported or opposed. And it really is only as successful as the number of voices and volunteers who are willing to get out there and make their message heard. The first step of grassroots advocacy is just to get involved. You want to participate in lobby days that are hosted by associations, go to events or fundraisers, respond to the alerts that you might receive from the associations that ask you to call or write your legislators or regulators. And then you can always, of course, even volunteer with the legislators' campaigns. As I mentioned, some of them are campaigning pretty regularly to try to keep their seats. Working with NAVTA and your state veterinary technician and veterinary medical association to do these things really will be most effective. Studies have shown that many voices echoing the same message really carries, as you can imagine, significant weight as the legislators and regulators consider their stances. The associations can also, of course, provide you with facts and the background on legislation and regulations and coordinate these grassroots actions so that it's a cohesive and productive process. There we go. Even with the ongoing pandemic, meetings face-to-face, whether that's virtually or in person, has really time and time again proven to be the most effective way of communicating with the legislator or their staff. And of course, in-person meetings are not always possible, whether that's due to a pandemic or just the logistics of getting to the office or meeting time with a legislator. There are still effective ways to communicate with legislators. The state associations, NAVTA and the AVMA can send action alerts. You might already receive some of these, hopefully. Send these out to members asking for you to call or write your legislator. Generally, there's a template that you'll see included in these action alerts with the message that you're asked to relay. For these alerts or these messages to the legislators to have the most impact, you're going to want to really personalize that information that you include. You want to include information about where you work, maybe how many years you've lived in the district, and anything that really may support the topic of the letter. We often find that form letters, so just cut and pasting the same message over and over again, from all of the different senders, those kind of get batched together. The legislator notices that, oh, okay, 100 constituents all took the time to send this one form letter, but otherwise they really kind of discard those and they don't carry a whole lot of weight. So key here really is just personalizing your message, even if you find that you're not able to get to an in-person event. And this, of course, is not to say that a town hall is ineffective. Town halls really can be quite effective for constituents to learn about issues, hear what the legislator is currently thinking, maybe what issues are important to them, and then just get some practice in speaking and asking questions of a legislator. Another topic you'll hear folks talk about are coalitions, and coalitions are essentially groups which coalesce around promoting a particular position or an issue. These can be really disparate groups that have very little in common, but come together around maybe one piece of legislation. Or these are groups that have a lot in common and frequently work together. I would consider around veterinary technician issues, the AVMA, NAVTA, the state VMA, and the State Veterinary Technician Association, as a coalition working together on those issues. And these really form in hopes of capitalizing on strength in numbers and the strengths of each member and the grassroots volunteers of the different organizations, that we're all echoing the same message, carrying forward that to the legislators. This broad-based coalition can also really help smaller organizations reach more legislators and actually get the attention of the legislative leadership. A coalition often creates new relationships and establishes alliances that can really serve various purposes behind that united front. And so once you've maybe made a relationship or gotten introduced to a group that maybe you don't normally work with on this topic, oftentimes something comes up in the future and it's nice to have that contact. These coalitions can be loose arrangements, some that I think about when we work on the veterinary technician issues, in the state level. These are loose arrangements. We all just email or hop on a call together. But then other coalitions can be quite formal, where you have dues that are paid, there's a chair, there are bylaws, things like that. And so can be a little bit more of a formal situation. And we would be remiss, I guess, if we didn't talk about money as it relates to politics. Often seen really probably as a dirty part of politics, the political action committees or the PACs are really just established for the purpose of raising and spending money to elect or defeat candidates. Most PACs represent trade organizations. The AVMA has a PAC, a number of state veterinary medical associations have PACs. And we raise money from a certain class, which is really heavily regulated by the Federal Election Commission at the national level. AVMA can solicit contributions from really our AVMA members. And there are restrictions on how much money can be donated to candidates or to parties, or how much, say, one PAC can give to another PAC. So again, this is really quite regulated. And the purpose for us, and the reason that the PAC is so important for the AVMA, is that because, of course, every day Congress is making decisions or considering pieces of legislation that would impact the profession. And these contributions allow us to go to events for the congressional members. As I mentioned, they are regularly campaigning, and particularly at the federal level, the campaigns are incredibly expensive to run. And so we make the contributions and attend the event, and it just gives us the face time with that legislator or their staff to talk about the AVMA's issues and establish that relationship, or to maintain that relationship with that legislator. At the state level, you will hear me say over and over again, it varies on what is allowed and the rules that apply to PACs and other political contributions. Some state associations, like I said, have been able to establish political action committees, and each state is different though. So if you do have questions about that, we definitely have to refer you to the state's election division to learn more about what's allowed in your particular state. Staying up to date with your state legislature, with Congress, political campaigns, it can be a little bit difficult at first. There's a lot of information out there. It can maybe be a little bit overwhelming and where to start, but there are plenty of resources out there available, hopefully to make it as easy as possible. One thing that we would recommend and that we all do is sign up for newsletters from, of course, the state associations. NAVTA, the AVMA has a number of newsletters. You can follow your state and federal legislators on their social media, or sign up to receive updates from their office. You want to be active with your association when a call to action is received. These alerts really can inform you as much as the information that is getting sent to the legislator. And when in doubt, just reach out and ask questions. Like I said, having a coordinated response is really crucial to getting the results that we want to see. And so I think all of us who are staffing associations are happy to get questions and try to be helpful. So if you take a moment to think about your day-to-day life or your day-to-day work, well, like personal or professional, and think about sort of some of the pain points or things that you wish could be improved upon as it relates to different policies, laws, or regulations. And hopefully we can all appreciate that veterinary medicine is impacted by so many policies, whether it's animal welfare decisions, small business, education, scope of practice, just to name a couple. And while maybe some of these issues don't resonate with you, or maybe multiple resonate, there is probably some issue you have somewhere that I can guarantee a policymaker is looking at, making a decision on it, or working on it, and you can have a role in shaping it. So I don't know, Phil, if there are any questions, or maybe you tell me how the sound is going.
The sound sounds great. Thank you. You're good there. And there are a few questions here, and a couple of that we could probably answer in tandem. But I'll let you pick this first one. It says touring your state capitol building and sitting in on sessions can be hugely educational. How can a veterinary technician do this, or even the VTA coordinate?
I mean, I think, definitely at the federal level, I can find the information for that. I think at the state level, there is, and we can help find the information, but just even calling, there would be a general phone number or contact person there on the state legislature's website, where you could just call and ask how to arrange a meeting, or when is the public viewing hours, or how do you go about that, particularly with pandemic. And hopefully we're seeing a lot of those things opening up and less restrictions on that. But I would start with the state legislature's website. And honestly, the times that we've even just cold called their general number, the people are really always happy to hear from, and quite honestly used to having constituents ask how to come and see what's happening. So that's probably where I would start, but we're happy to help with that.
Thank you. That's great. Next question. How does one find coalitions? I'm assuming related to the veterinary profession or veterinary healthcare. Is there a list of coalitions?
There might be a list of coalitions somewhere. I mean, I have a list of all the coalitions that the AVMA is involved in, or at least, yeah, I mean, I feel like it's fairly coalitions that the AVMA is involved in at the federal level. As far as at the state level, I think probably checking in, I don't know, again, some of these are really not very formal coalitions, not very formalized organizational groups. The State Veterinary Medical Association would probably be able to tell you if there is any formal coalition to be involved in. Again, in speaking with, I believe it was Colorado earlier this week, they were mentioning a coalition of like animal welfare, an animal welfare group that is a coalition. And so I think probably the best place to start might be checking in with the Veterinary Medical Association and seeing if there are any groups that maybe the Veterinary Technician Association is not already involved in, but could participate. Again, oftentimes these are very informal groups. It's an email group. They get together and whether meet in person or online, probably used to be conference calls and now it's video, but just asking if you can be involved and how to learn more. I think would probably be the best way to find out what's available locally.
This one, I think we could probably answer in tandem. Is there someone to contact at AVMA that could be a point of contact or to get a letter of support for those states trying to regulate vet techs? And I can interject here that I know NAVTA certainly has the structure in place to help with that. So we've got the district representative structure through which the states can always communicate, and that goes directly to the NAVTA board. So we highly encourage the states to get in touch with us if they need letters of support. We're active. Last year we were active in, I think it was 22 different states, whether it was a letter of support, participating in meetings, whatever it might be. If your association needs help, support, anything from NAVTA, you can certainly just reach out to your district rep and go through that channel, and then that will make its way up to NAVTA. Or you can certainly reach out to me directly at director@navta.net, and you can reach out, and then that will get directly to the board, and then we'll just funnel it back to our district rep channel that way as well. But is there a similar situation to that? And I'll add that and then toss it over to you, Ashley. NAVTA regularly meets with AVMA. We've got a regular call every 2 or 3 months. We meet with them. And Ashley and I are pretty much in regular communication whenever we see something come along that relates to vet techs. If I'm not reaching out to her, she's reaching out to me, letting me know. So we're regularly working in tandem on those letters of support. But is there a structure other than that, Ashley, that you might want to talk about?
I mean, I think like you said, Phil, we're in pretty regular contact, but I would be the person that would be the contact at the AVMA. And I will say that when you contact me, the first person I will be contacting is Phil to ask him what NAVTA is, that make sure NAVTA is involved and engaged. And then also the Veterinary Medical Association. So like I said, AVMA for the state level stuff, we do work with the Veterinary Medical Association. And so I think all 4 of, or at least I would then be connecting with those 2 other groups, but I would be the person at the AVMA to connect with on that.
Fantastic. Relatively simple question, I think. Can we subscribe to AVMA newsletters as non-members?
Yes, there are a number of those. And I can, if you want, I have my contact information. It's just amorgan@avma.org, and I'll have that posted at the end. But I can help facilitate where to go in there. But a lot of times just on the website, there's a little button that says sign up for the newsletter if you go to the advocacy section. But I can share that stuff with you, Phil, if you don't mind distributing it.
That would be awesome. And then the last question in this section, any suggestions to try and engage the Board of Veterinary Medical Examiners and the VMA when they have been largely unresponsive?
I do know that I have heard of situations. So it's always disappointing or hard, when that comes up, when there hasn't been the responsiveness or the level of responsiveness I think that we would like. I think some of it is to continue trying. I think also maybe reach out to me. I'm not saying that we can fix it, but that if we can possibly help, maybe facilitate some discussions or in some way be helpful, would like to speak with someone about that a little bit more. I don't know that there's probably a quick fix answer here today, but I would encourage you to not give up and to maybe reach out, Phil, if they reach out to you and to me, and maybe we can all hop on a call and brainstorm together. Because some of those can definitely be challenging situations. Unfortunately, they do sometimes arise.
Absolutely. And we did just get one question that's kind of similar in line. When a governor is the one who approves or appoints a seat to an RVT on the Veterinary Medical Examiners Board, what is the best way to go about initiating that? So what's the best way to get to the governor?
Right. My understanding, and again, it will vary by state, but we have for a state recently that was going through this process, because the board regularly turns over and has new appointees. People apply, there's an application process, and people apply. And in some states, and I don't know if this is true, I would hesitate to say this is true for all of them, but in some states, the existing board members that are remaining on the board actually look at the applicants and kind of approve or make a recommendation to the governor on who they want the governor to approve. I think having the veterinary technician associations and the veterinary medical associations support would be incredibly helpful for an applicant trying to be appointed for that position. So I think that would also be a place to start for an applicant, either the technician association to engage with the VMA or the applicant to ask even the VMA. I feel like they are, since they have so many veterinarians, that are regularly applying for those board seats, to kind of talk with them a little bit more about what works best in that state.
Thank you. Another question came in. Do you want to take this question now, or do you want to, I know it's 11:48 where I am. I mean, how are we doing for time on your end?
I was going to say, I can quickly move through, and I can also then share the slides. So it's whether I'm happy to answer questions, and then also, like I said, can very quickly move through some of these remaining slides.
Okay, one more question just came in. Let's do this one, and then we'll move on to your next section. It's, how do you go about creating a vet tech position on the Board of Examiners?
A lot of times that does require an act of the legislature, where you either need to add the seat or add language to the statute that establishes the board, because that will list out that you have 5 members who are veterinarians, one of whom must be a large animal veterinarian, that sort of example language from a state we were looking at recently. And then you would have the language amended to say, one of which may be, or one of which must be, or shall be a veterinary technician or a registered veterinary technician, or whatever terminology is used in that state. And so a lot of times it does require an act of the legislature to change that. When it's established otherwise it requires a change to the regulation, but most that we've seen, these are all spelled out in the statute that establishes the board.
Thank you. I think we can move on then. Thanks.
No, sure. And so, like I said, I will move through some of this pretty quickly, but obviously if people have questions, you will have my contact information and happy to answer it. So I'm going to kind of, like I said, move through here. So let's see, I think this is mostly, we are talking about how to bring legislators, as you can imagine, they're in their day jobs, they're here as legislators, they don't have a lot of experience with agriculture or veterinary medicine or the profession. And so really, you're the best folks to talk with them on this. And so there may come a time, we hope that you will be asked to talk with your legislator. Legislation has been introduced, and either you want to weigh in or the association has asked you to weigh in. So the first thing you're going to want to do, of course, is identify your legislator. And if you don't know who your legislator is, that is not unusual. You really want to just go to, for the U.S. Congress, you can go to their website. Otherwise, you can just Google, find your legislator, go to your state legislatures website. And a lot of times it just asks you to enter the zip code of your voting address, and it will pop up with your legislators. We also have a site on a location on AVMA's website that can help you with this as well. Happy to share that around. But you do want to identify your legislator. And really, we hope that the meeting you're going to be having is instigated by maybe the state association, NAVTA, or AVMA, really for coordination. And so a lot of times the organization will be the one who is setting up the meeting, which is part of maybe their Hill Day or the fly-in. And of course, they would share the information with you on, when or where your meeting is. If you yourself are contacting and want to make a meeting request with your state legislator, if it's with the federal government, you will likely interact with their scheduler. You would just call or email their office. Again, this information is all found on their websites, but just ask if you have trouble finding that. Getting a meeting with the federal legislator can be quite difficult. They have a lot of folks vying for their time, so really don't be discouraged if you have to meet with a staffer. Staffers honestly are really the gatekeepers to the legislators and have considerable sway over how a legislator will vote. So meeting with a staffer is not necessarily a bad thing. As I mentioned, they're campaigning all the time, and so they are often back in the district. And so you really may have a better chance of meeting with them in district. So also give that a try. And if you are calling your state legislator's office, you want to be patient. These folks often don't have any staff at all. They're answering their own phones. And so again, are busy. You want to be polite and patient and willing to meet with them when they're back in the district. And as I mentioned, a lot of the sessions are short. And so they are back then in the district doing their day job. One of the most important aspects of the meeting really is to know the purpose of the visit and what you're asking the legislator to do. Do you want them to support legislation or oppose a piece of legislation, offer an amendment like we just were talking about with getting a seat for the veterinary technician on the board? And really, this is where coordination with the state association, NAVTA, and AVMA would be so important to try to get all of that coordinated to get the results we want. You want to know what your opposition or the opponents are saying. That way you know how to tier your messaging and really be able to clearly articulate how your request will impact veterinary medicine in the district or the state. And a personal story can go a long way. As I mentioned earlier, personalizing your outreach, your messages. They want to know how this is going to impact you and the district. And it really brings that whole theoretical idea of the legislative, maybe the legislative idea into reality and what that would look like. Getting to know your lawmaker also goes a long way, knowing what committee assignments they have, maybe where they're from. If they have any pets, it kind of gives you a way maybe to make a little bit of a connection with them so that when you're meeting with them and oh, we're from the same hometown, or oh, I see you have cats. I work on cats, or I work with cats, really can go a long way to establishing a relationship and a good conversation and making you memorable in a good way. You really want to maximize your time when you're meeting with them. As I mentioned, they just like I think we think about in clinical practice when you've got appointments every 15 minutes and something always sort of backs you up. And so then you're running behind and running from one thing to the next. They are very much the same. You want to keep your introductions brief and really define the issue, ask for what you want, and really do your best to stay on message. Legislators really love to chat and talk about maybe bigger picture things instead of really the topic you're there. They don't want to have to say no to a constituent. And so they'll, oh, you work on animals. I love animals. Let me tell you about my dog, or things like that. And so you really want to try to keep them on message. And it's important, of course, to be prompt and prepared, and of course, to be professional in both, how you dress and your actions with them. And it's important, like I said, they're meeting with a lot of people. You want to stand out in a good way. But some of the things you don't want to do would be cover too many issues. Even if you think you have plenty of time, time always starts to run short. Don't use medical jargon that's maybe outside of something they would understand, particularly if you can't easily and quickly define it. And you don't want to mislead them. I don't know many people intentionally say things that are inaccurate, but sometimes I think we are all caught off guard by a question we don't know the answer to. So don't be afraid to just say that you aren't sure and that you will get back with them. I think I've probably done that a few times today, Phil, where I said I honestly didn't know rather than trying to make it up. I think people appreciate folks being factual and transparent. And you also want to keep in touch with them. They have a lot of things that they are being asked to do and a lot of decisions that they're trying to make. So it's really up to us to keep the issue before them and really not let that ball get dropped. And most importantly, you don't want to get into an argument with them. In this current politically charged environment, it is very easy to maybe meet with someone who has a different ideological or political leaning than you do. And it's very possible that you didn't vote for the legislator that you were having to meet with that represents your district or your state. But that doesn't mean that you can't persuade them or educate them on an issue that's important to you and important to the profession. So you want to keep it professional and keep the conversation focused on the issue at hand. Thankfully, most legislators really like veterinarians and the veterinary profession and veterinary medicine. So they are always happy to hear from folks like us. A typical visit, I would say, is not very typical. So you may meet with the lawmaker in their office, maybe on the golf course. You meet with them in a hallway over lunch or coffee. You just really want to be prepared no matter where you meet them. And after your meeting, it's important to follow up. You should thank them for their time. Send an email, honestly, is the best way to go about this, but thank them for their time. Repeat what you've asked them to do. Answer any questions that they might have had that you promised to follow back up on, and provide a summary in the email is always nice if the staffer then has that. This is also where you would provide any other resources and connect them with maybe the association lobbyists or staff at the association so that they can kind of continue that conversation. This really serves to keep you in the forefront of the legislator's mind. Social media is a great way to enhance that follow-up. Legislators really enjoy meeting with constituents and then showing that they care about what's happening in their district, posting it on social media. So if you take a photo when you're with them, be sure to post that and tag their account. After your preparation in the meeting, it's important to really maintain that connection that you've worked so hard to establish. This is really best generating with the association, generating that coordinated response with the association. So you could, what we've seen folks doing now is arranging in-clinic meetings or inviting them to your organization's meeting as a guest, and they can hear more stories or hear more about the issue. Those have really been quite successful. And it might seem difficult at first, but really it can be as simple as sending an email just to check in with them or share a news article or a letter or something like that. And here, speaking about letters to the editors can be very helpful. I would coordinate with a state association or NAVTA in getting these placed, but that can be a really nice way to keep something at the forefront of a legislator's mind because they do see the media for their districts and states. Let's see. Being an advocate, we've talked about, is so important, and there are so many ways to get involved, so I won't belabor that. And then I think one last point here would be around engaging with regulators, because I know this has been fairly heavy on the legislator piece, but in general, veterinary medical boards are the governmental agencies, right, with the mission to protect the state's consumers and the animals through the regulation of veterinary medicine. And I think it's important to remember that. We often, I'm guilty of it as well, forget that that's what their mission is, and that's the lens through which they consider all of their regulations, and their perspective is that they are protecting the public. They write and enforce the regulations and really handle the day-to-day functions of consumer outreach, licensing, enforcement, and veterinary premise inspections. And some boards, there's one staff person that does all of the work, and then you have the board. And other states, there are more people on staff, but it can really be a quite small staff running that board. The boards do host public meetings, which you can attend to learn more about the issues that the board is working on, considering and hearing their opinions. You really want to pay attention to the call for public comments. That's when you and the associations can weigh in and really should weigh in with your perspective. And while the boards are mostly made up of veterinarians, that really doesn't mean that they understand all the aspects, of the profession and the impacts that the regulations will have, as we've touched on earlier. So I would say that much at the state level, interactions outside the public meetings with the public can vary by states. And so some boards we know never interact with the state associations or public outside of those meetings, whereas other boards really have regular ongoing conversations, or I should say their staff, the board staff, have ongoing conversations with maybe the state veterinary medical association. So there's a little more flow of communication, and it really varies significantly. And quite honestly, is probably best navigated through the state associations for their help. But I would definitely encourage you to get the newsletters from the board, keep an eye on their agendas for the public meetings, and calls for action from your association. So I know, Phil, we're kind of cutting it close here to the hour. a lot of information, but always happy to answer questions if folks want to get in touch.
Thank you, Ashley. Yeah, this was incredibly helpful. There are remarkably no questions in the Q&A box right now, so you've done a remarkable job of answering everyone's questions. So thank you for that. There's lots of activity going on in the chat box and lots of great networking going on and people helping each other and answering each other's questions. And there were a couple of questions in the Q&A box I was able to answer directly, but this certainly spurred lots of conversation. It was an incredibly helpful session for me, I'm sure for everyone here, with lots of great takeaways. So I want to thank you for sharing your expertise with us and for making yourself available to us, not only just on this webinar, but throughout the days and weeks. You're an incredible asset to all of us. So, and I would just encourage folks on the webinar, if you have issues related to government affairs and government relations, use the NAVTA system that's in place here. Just send me an email to director@navta.net. Work through your district rep. Like I said, we are in constant contact with AVMA. We'll bring them in whenever they're needed. It's a great working relationship we have. So, and I thank Ashley for that. And we'll help you out. We want to do that. It's part of our role. It's part of our mission. It's part of AVMA's mission as well too. And they've been a great partner, especially in this realm. So, so thank you again, Ashley. Thanks for sharing all of your expertise. It's greatly appreciated. Thank you all for joining us. Please be sure to complete the evaluation form you received from NAVTA in the next couple of days. We really do listen to and take to heart your feedback, and that'll form the agenda for future webinars, certainly for next year's summit as well. I hope that you're all able to join us for the next webinar in the series of webinars that make up this year's summit. That next session is titled Best Practice Policies and Governance Documents for Associations. It will begin at 12:30 Eastern Time in about 28 minutes or so. If you don't have a link to that Zoom session, please send me an email to director@navta.net and I'll get that to you very quickly. And thanks again to our sponsor, Merck, for making this possible. And we wish you all a great day. Thank you again, Ashley, and we'll see you all very soon. Thank you.
Yeah.